So let's now split one huge component into many small ones using the framework that we just learned about. Now, as always, to start, we need to get our starter files here from this folder. So let's grab these two, and then let's move back to our project folder. And as always, I'm renaming it, and then let's paste the new files right in here into the source folder. And then we need to replace these and just get rid of some of this garbage that we have here. All right, so as always, we just end up with index.js, index.css, and app.js. Then we just grab all this and open it in VS Code as always. Close down this one. And yeah, then we need to clean up this file here. And so this is always a little bit of tedious work, but we just have to do it. And actually that's already done. You can take a look here at the CSS if you'd like, because there's actually a lot of it to make this application here work. So to style that application. But what matters most to us is, of course, this app.js. So here we have this array of objects that I talked about in the previous lecture. Here then we have another array of objects, which is for this watched list. And then here we have that huge component that I was talking about. So it has all this JSX inside. So basically all of this, the entire application is now inside of one component. To prove that to you, let's actually start this application here, because this one here is of course still the demo. So let's open up our integrated terminal. That's slightly too big. And then npm start. So that should then open up a new tab in here. And there it is. So make this even smaller. And yeah, so there is the app. And as I was saying in the first lecture, it does work here in terms of collapsing these two lists, also writing something in here. So all of that is working, and it's all working within this one huge component. And so I thought that it was a nice exercise to basically pretend that we're working on some team and that one of our team members created this huge component. And now it's our task to take it and split it up into small components that make it easy to work with and, well, which isn't this huge mess. So let's use the framework that we learned about in the previous lecture to do that. So let's take a look at our JSX here. And if you want, you can of course pause the video and do that on your own, because there is a lot to unpack here. So we have this nav bar here. So this entire thing here is this nav element. And then we have this main part, which is all of this. Then inside the nav, we have this box here for this left side, which contains this list. And then we have another box on the right side, which contains all of this. But we will take care of that later. So for now, let's basically split up all of this here into the nav bar and into this main part. So I think to start, that's the best logical separation of the content, which is, remember, the first criteria that we talked about. So those were logical separation of content, second, reusability, third, responsibilities and complexity, and fourth, the personal coding style. So this navbar here and the main content here, they really don't belong together. And so that's a good idea then to create a component for each of them. So I'm cutting this code here, and I will actually now create these components here on top. Otherwise, I have to scroll too much. So let's write function navbar and then return simply this. Give it a save, and now it's complaining here. So we now need to also move this state here into this other component. So this one here is depending on query and set query, and so therefore we need to move that state right there. And so actually having all the state here was another great indicator that this component here had way too many responsibilities. So we have 5 pieces of state and then these 3 derived states. So that's way too much. So let's just cut this here, paste that here. And here we also need the movies, but I'll for now just replace this here with an X. Okay, so now the navbar is gone because of course we haven't yet included it here. And so let's do that. And now our app looks just like before. And so now let's then grab all this other code, all of this, cut it, and put it into yet another component. And this one, let's actually call it main. And as we save it, it will now complain that it needs all of these states here. So for now, let's just grab everything and paste that here. All right. And then, well, we just have to include, of course, that main right here. And then after doing that, the app should look just like before. Well, for some reason it isn't, but let's see that in a minute. For now, I will just take this component here actually back to the top. So just here. Now let's open up our console. Maybe we have some errors here that we're not catching, but well, actually no. But I think I know. And the reason is that here we are not returning. So we were not returning any JSX. And so then of course, we couldn't have any JSX here in the UI. Great. So let's keep going and let's look again at our navbar. So our navbar is now a lot simpler than before, but it's still doing a lot of different things here, I would say. So we are displaying a logo, we have this input field, and we have the number of results here. Now, in a way, all of this does actually belong together because, well, together they form this navbar. So we could definitely argue that this is okay like this. But on the other hand, it still takes some work to actually figure out what this component here is doing. And maybe we even might want to reuse some parts of it. So for example, this search bar, which is basically this, we might want to reuse it all over the place in the application, at least if the app grew a bit bigger in the future. And so let's at least grab this part here and extract it into its own component. So I'm cutting that. And then let's create a function simply called search. Then return that JSX. And of course, we will then need this state. And we will want to include that here. Give it a save. And then it looks exactly like before. Okay. But now something happened here that I personally really don't like, which is to have one piece of JSX which mixes like these native HTML elements with our custom components. So we have this div, we have this p, but then in the middle, we have like our own search. So that I think looks really ugly and I really don't like that. I think it's quite confusing. And so let's actually also extract the logo and the num results. And so then we make this component here really nice and clean and end up with these 3 components here where each of them has its own responsibility. So let's create the logo. So we will end up here with a few small and reusable components if we'd like. So we have our logo and then let's say num results. Function num results. All right, this doesn't look quite correct. And yeah, now all we have to do is to include them here. And then num results. And this looks a lot nicer. So as soon as we look at our navbar component, we can immediately see, it contains a logo, a search, and the num results. And from there, if we were interested, we could then really drill down into each of these components if we needed to. And of course, if we wanted, we could even keep going. So we could now create like one component here for the icon and one for the title, so to say. But that would then be that situation in which we would end up with like hundreds of mini components, which really isn't worth it. So this is more than enough. This logo is doing just one thing. So it has one responsibility already, which is basically to display this logo, which is all this. So there's absolutely no need to break it down even further. So this is perfect like this. So the navbar is now finished, and we are ready to break up the main component, of course, a lot more as well. So looking at our first criterion, which is the logical separation of content, we clearly have no clear separation right now. So we have one component that has all of this. And so the first visual division that I would make here is to create one component for this box and one for the right one here. And so let's do just that. Take this box. And then let's move down here and create the list box. All right, and I'm calling it the list box. And now we can see. So again, I'm calling this component here the list box because in there is where we will have this list of movies here. So let's now grab the state that is missing here. So set open 1 and the movies. So cutting that from here and placing it here. All right. Now, of course, when you build your own apps in the future, then you will not build one huge component like this. This is just an exercise so that we can apply what we learned before. But again, never build such a huge component like this, because there's really no need to then have all the work of splitting that huge component up like we are doing right now. But I think that, yeah, for learning, this is fun and absolutely no problem. So let's grab this other box as well and place it into the watched box. So function watched box. All right. Let's grab all the state that we need here. And let's also already include both the boxes here. So that's the list box and the watched box. So basically exactly the code that we had here before, now split up into these two components. Placing the state there, and it's not appearing, but that's because, once again, I forgot to return here. Nice. So let's keep going, because I still think that this is way too big. So just looking at this code, it looks quite confusing. You cannot immediately understand what this component here is doing. It has like this button here, which does something, and then we have all of this code down here. And so now what I want to do is to extract this code here into its own list component, which will then have only one responsibility, which is to simply display, well, the list of movies. So let's grab this, cut it from here, and place it right here. So movie list. And I keep forgetting to return. And then here we also need that movies state. And yeah, here then all we need to do is to include that movie list. Nice. And this is still working. Yes, and so we're doing a great job here. So this component is now a lot easier to understand here, if you ask me. So we have one button, and then if that button is open, we show the movie list. Nice. So getting better and better. And I just want to mention that in the real world, we would probably have one file for each of these components. So something I said already many times ago, or many times before, but I still wanted to just mention that here. So we now have this movie list component right here, and for many people this would now be enough. But if it comes down to my personal coding style or my personal preference, I would actually like to still extract this list element here into its own movie. And we have actually done that many times before already in this application, where we had one component for the list, which would then simply loop over some array and then display one component for each element. And so now I will do exactly the same here. So again, this is now a bit more of my personal preference, but I think that it's actually quite a sensible thing to do, because then here we have the mapping over the array here isolated in this one component, and have then one component which is really only about the movie and nothing else. And again, keep forgetting to return here. And yeah, let's then use that movie here. And what will happen is that we will pass the current movie, so this one here that's coming from the map, as a prop into that component. We will also need this key, no longer here, but now here, and finally accept that prop right here. We give it a save, we have no error, and so let's keep going. So I think we are quite finished here with this left part, and so let's go over here. Now here we can already see that it's a bit more complex, because here we have not only the list, but also like this summary of the list. But let's see what we actually have there. So it's inside this watched box. And of course, we can also start seeing our components tree right here, which is always nice. So I always like to do that, actually. And so it's coming together here quite nicely. Maybe it doesn't even have to be this big. Then we can see a bit better. And so, yeah, this is exactly what we have been building. And now all we have to do is to also break up this watched box a bit better. So let's take care of that. And first up, I will do that division that I just mentioned earlier. So we have this list here and also this summary. So let's grab that summary here. And so that's basically this div with the class name of summary. So I'm cutting that. And then let's just create function watched summary, and then returning this. So now this code here actually depends on a few things. So all of these variables. So let's see what they are. So that's these variables right here plus the watched. Now we could pass all of these three here individually, or actually the four of them. So watched plus these three here. So we could pass them into the watched box component that we just created. But actually, if we take a look at them, all of them simply depend on the watched state. And so what we're going to do is to grab this and pass this watched list, so that array, right here as a prop. Okay, moving there, pasting that here. And of course we need to accept that prop then here. And now React is happy again. So again, what we did is that these three pieces here are derived state, and they are derived from this watched array right here. And so we simply passed the watched array into this component, and then, yeah, just moved these three here, of course, also into this component. And so we did that instead of leaving this here in the parent component and passing all of them one by one. But this code here clearly belongs in this component. So it's clearly part of the responsibility of watched summary to calculate its own statistics. And if all it needs to do that is this watched array, well, then we are happy to provide it with exactly that array. But moving on, let's now create another list, which is here for this watched, so this watched movies list. So cut that as well. So let's call this one here the watch list. And of course, we could have also called it the watched movie list. And let's actually do that. So remember how I said that we should not be afraid of long component names. And so I think that this is a bit better actually. Now here we will need that watched array. So that piece of state that we have up here. Right? But let's first give it a save and then see that error. And well, nothing really happened here. Well, first of all, we have a bug here, and it's a big one, which is that we are here including the same component inside itself. So we are including watched box inside watched box. So this was by mistake. Probably you have noticed this as I was typing. So here, of course, it needs to be the watched summary, which is the component that we were talking about before. But still, nothing is happening. So let's try to reload here. But now we have like this infinite loop. So maybe we have some errors, but yeah, I think the best thing to do is to actually quit the application altogether and then just try to restart. So let's wait for it. And yeah, let's close the old one. And now we get that error that we had before. So before I fix that, or actually let's pass it in already here, but I still wanted to say that it's really, really important that you do not call the component inside of itself. So again, I was calling watched box in here. And so the problem was that this then created an infinite loop of the component calling itself. And so that's why when I was reloading the application, React here wasn't really reacting. So the application wasn't really able to then render itself. And again, because of that infinite loop. So never do what I just did here by mistake. But anyway, we now passed the watched array here into this watched movies list. And so here we just need to receive that, give it a save, and then we are back to normal. Let's quickly get our console back. And yeah, so this is the list that we have. And now just one more component where, just like before, I will extract the list item into its own component. So grabbing all of this, let's create the watched movie. Here we already know that we need to accept the movie. And here, remember, it's very important that we place the prop name into these curly braces, because we are, in fact, just destructuring the props object. Right? And so then here, all we have to do is to write watched movie, pass in the movie prop. And yeah, we also need this key right here. And with this, we should be done. And we are indeed. So the app works and looks just like before. But we now divided this application into its logical components. So components that have a logical separation of the content, that might be reusable, and that have the right number of responsibilities and of complexity.